First of all, I want to say thank you to everyone for joining us today. I want to start by thanking you again for all that you're doing to support the UT system at this challenging and important time. I continue to be impressed by how effectively you've all adapted to these challenges of working remotely. I did an interview yesterday with a reporter, and she asked me if I were working at home, said she wouldn't tell anyone. I said, well, you can tell anyone you'd like, and I will tell them that I think I'm working a lot harder at home than I ever did in the office. It's hard to believe. The commute's shorter, I know that, and just seems like it is a lot of work right now because there's just a lot of uncertainty and a lot going on. But I thank you all because I know you're in the same boat. So today, for those of you who haven't seen this pop up or haven't been in a Hallmark shop lately, it's National Take Your Sons and Daughters to Work Day, which I suspect for some of you is ironic and maybe more, since those of you who have kids at home right now may be looking forward to a little more separation and not having your sons and daughters at work with you, but I know you're making do. The other thing I saw today was a note from the facility staff that they're doing something, shutting down the water to check the chlorine levels. And I checked with Scott on this because, you know, we put in place a plan to install an indoor swimming pool for you when you get back, so that to welcome you back to the office. I'm not sure where that stands. The Army may be using it now. So today we're going to give you an overview of some of the things going on around the system, around the state. You know, there's been a lot of activity in recent weeks in Texas and across the country. Announcements by the governor that will affect our plans, of course. I'm going to call on some of my colleagues. You can see them on the screen during the talk. And so we can address the questions that are submitted. There were many more questions submitted than we could answer all of. So I'm going to try to say a few words at the beginning that will address some of them. And then we sort of collapsed some together so that the experts could respond to them. And if you haven't submitted a question, you have one, you still have an opportunity to do it. There's a chat line on the Zoom call, and you can submit a question, and I'll see them and can call on somebody from the team or answer it myself. So it's been about a month since we last met. That seems incredible to me. You know, so much has happened in Texas since then. Just to highlight this a little bit, if you can call it a highlight, when we met last on March 24th, there globally were 418,000 COVID cases, now 2.6 million. On that day in the United States, there were 54,000 cases. Today, there are 845,000 cases. In Texas, that a month ago, there were less than 1,000. Today, about 22,000 cases. So we're still approaching the peak or the surge, and there's a lot of work going on. And we've had folks from our team be involved in it. And we're going to give them a chance to talk about a little. The first thing I'm going to do to start this off is basically how we start our meetings often when this leadership team gets together, is to get a high-level perspective from David Lakey about kind of the situation, mainly focusing on Texas and to some degree the country, and kind of give us a sense of where we are in the pathway of this pandemic. So David?
Thank you, Chancellor, and good afternoon, everyone. We are following multiple models. Obviously, everyone wants to know where we are in this outbreak. As I tell folks, multiple models none of them are perfect, but some of them are useful. If we look at the model from the University of Washington, it would say that the number of deaths should be peaking either today or tomorrow. If we look at the University of Texas Austin model, it says there's probably about a 64% chance that we have peaked and about an 89% chance that we will peak within the next week. And so no matter which model you look at, we're at that peak or maybe right after the peak related to this wave of COVID-19. I've also learned from my experience that infectious diseases don't always follow the rules, and sometimes they're unpredictable, and you can have several waves. And so we're watching these numbers very carefully right now, not only within the UT system, but also as a state as a whole. One of the metrics that we watch is the number of case counts. The challenge with monitoring the case counts is testing. Until we have universal testing available, you have to be somewhat careful looking at the case counts. But we have between 500 and 1,000 new cases per day. Over the last 24 hours, we had about 750 new cases, and that's been stable for about the last 2 weeks. The doubling time has increased. When we started this, it was about 2 to 3 days. We now have a doubling time of about 13 days. We expect that to continue to spread and become longer. And as the Chancellor noted, we have a little over 22,000 cases in Texas right now, about 570 deaths in the state of Texas. If you look at the cases, most of the individuals have been between the ages of 20 and 59, with each 10-year interval just a little bit higher than the previous one. But if we look at who's really having severe illness, it is those that are greater than the age of 80. And if you look at the data in Texas, we have more cases in Harris County than any other area. That's followed by Dallas, then Tarrant County, and then here in Travis County. The testing is improving. A lot of work is taking place right now under the leadership of Dr. John Zerwas to expand the availability of testing across the state. And I would note, though, that our UT institutions are doing a big part of that testing across the state. So if you look at the current data, about 216,000 individuals have been tested. If you look at UTMB, they've tested 11,000 people of that. And they're not only testing Galveston, but a lot of the Houston area, and MD Anderson, UT Southwestern are doing the same. UTRGV, they've tested over 1,600 individuals and have documented over 102 cases. And so again, our universities are right in the middle on the front lines of this outbreak. We're also been doing a lot of work. Dr. Zerwas has been leading the work to make sure that we have the hospital capacity for the state. A lot of work has taken place, that we are prepared. If there is a surge, if there are more cases, our hospitals are ready. There are over 20,000 hospital beds ready, over 2,000 ICU beds that are ready if this got worse and there was an increase in the surge. And I guess I'd also say that much of that clinical care is happening, again, at our University of Texas hospitals or affiliate hospitals. And many of those cases are being seen in those facilities, and outpatients are being seen at our facilities right now. I think, Chancellor, the good news of the last week was the early peak at a clinical trial for a new medicine called remdesivir. The early peak to that data looked promising. Obviously, one clinical trial isn't enough to get FDA approval, but that's promising. And I would again note that our universities are in clinical trials studying that medicine, studying plasma therapy, studying a variety of possible therapeutic options so that we can be smarter in the care of people that come down with this disease. So with that, Chancellor, that's my quick update, and I'm happy at the end to take any questions.
Okay, thanks, David. So if people have questions for David or anyone else that's, that you see in front of you or that come up during the discussion, please send them on the chat. You know, I did notice one question while David was speaking. It really wasn't about the pandemic. It had something to do with what passes for my sense of humor. So for those of you who don't know me very well, I apologize, but I'm afraid to say we are not getting a swimming pool. So, you know, we'll try to do something else like have donuts when we get back, but no swimming pool. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an update kind of about the UT system and what's going on. I know a lot of you have pieces of this. Maybe not everybody has the full perspective of what's going on across our institutions. So our health institutions, as David alluded to, have been a critical part on the front lines of the effort to test and to treat COVID patients and to do research on vaccines and treatments for them. One of the first things that happened was Dr. Zerwas was heading up an effort to make sure that we had the beds available in Texas for an expected surge in COVID patients. We were watching particularly what was happening in New York and with tapping out of space at their hospitals and how acute the needs were. Well, in Texas, I think a combination of things, a little advanced planning and the opportunity to take actions swiftly and under John's leadership. And we freed up probably over 50% of our beds across the UT system, 70% in one case by not doing non-COVID related procedures. So this has, the combination of things has meant right now that we've had a lot of unused capacity, both because we safely got in front of this, but then didn't have the same level of cases. So we'll talk a little bit more about this, I think, in a bit, but you know that the governor now has started to ease off on the restrictions for doing non-COVID procedures, and our hospitals are gearing up this week to do that. It's a positive sign in a couple of ways. One is that some of these procedures that we weren't able to address are becoming more and more important and urgent. And so there's certainly a need to care for non-COVID patients, but also our health centers have been losing a significant amount of revenue, as have other hospitals around the state. And so it's a positive sign on many levels, the human level and also the financial level, that they are able to open up again now. But there are many, many success stories across the system at the health institutions. And if you haven't looked at it, this COVID website that External Relations has put up has a great sort of daily changing list of stories across the UT system about what our institutions are doing. And it's truly, truly impressive. So John did such a great job with freeing up beds that then he was given another unpaid assignment having to do with testing across the state, which is an essential part of how we operate as we move out of the peak and continue to manage this. And so, you know, the first thing is every time I see John on television with these press conferences with the governor, my first reaction is, good God, move more than 6 feet away from the people sitting next to you. And, you know, my second reaction is, I'm so pleased that in so many ways, the UT system is a part of this effort and critical to it. And having the Executive Vice Chancellor for Health Affairs be right there in the heart of it. Well, frankly, where he is right now, below ground in the command center, I think, for the state. So, John, do you want to offer some thoughts about the state's preparedness as we ease out of this?
Yeah, thank you, Chancellor, and appreciate you having this town hall. I know the people tuned in benefit greatly from it. I've had the opportunity to participate in several teletown halls with some of my former colleagues in the legislature, and they likewise are very well attended, and they're very, very tuned into what's going on. And I've had the privilege to kind of share some of that information. You're correct. I guess about a week or so ago, I was asked to move into the testing challenge out there after having achieved pretty much capacity as well as manpower capacity as a consequence of the things that the governor put in place. And testing is a big challenge, and Dr. Lakey already alluded to that to some degree. We have to have a very robust testing system in order for the governor to feel comfortable for really reopening the economy. This is probably no better realized than if you take the microcosm of a nursing home, and a nursing home gets an outbreak, and very quickly that can actually turn into a very, very horrific situation with multiple COVID cases in that setting, plus high-risk population. And being able to get in there, test very robustly, and doing the kind of interventions that are necessary will basically, save lives and allow them to deliver care in a safe way. Kind of think of that on a macrocosm level for the state of Texas, that as we open the economy and we allow people to engage more, still with some, things in place to, allow for social distancing. We've seen masks become popular. All the personal hygiene things that are important, but we're still going to see, some uptick in the number of cases that occur. And in order to really address those, identify points of contact, they call that contact tracing, and being able to kind of limit those people from going out and infecting others, which could really lead to another bump in the whole epidemic. We've got to have really strong testing ability out there. So I'm very pleased. In fact, I'll be on a call at 4 o'clock following this, where we're going to really revisit the whole process itself of testing. I'm very pleased that we do have the platform capability to do 30,000 tests a day, which you heard the governor mention. We've identified that capacity. We identified the ability to do that. But testing is not just, putting a sample in a machine and running it. First of all, you have to have the types of supplies to get a sample. And although it doesn't sound very pleasant, and it's not very pleasant, but typically you take a swab, you stick it in your nose all the way back to the back, and try to get some of this virus substance on that swab, put it in a virus media, transport media, and send it to the lab. Well, if you don't have the virus transport media, and if you don't have the swab, then you can't do a test. Believe it or not, that is a choke point for us in doing the kind of testing. So we've been very much about the business of enhancing our supply chain of things like swabs and viral transport media. Then you have to get it to the machine itself. And there's a variety of different machines out there. We've identified those machines. Some of them can do up to 1,600 tests in a day. However, because they don't have certain things like reagents, they call them, or chemicals to effectively run the test, they may only be able to do 150 to 200 in a day. And so there's the reagents that are a bottleneck that you have to get in place in order to be able to run the test. So we've been working feverishly in trying to really build that supply chain to be able to, in a very robust way, run the test. And then not to mention, you've got to, once you get it, you got to report it back to the physician of record and ultimately to the patient, and get that whole process done. There's machines that can run a test within 5 minutes out there also. Those aren't the high volume machines with rapid throughput, but they're good point of care machines. So among your healthcare workers, that's a good thing to have if you feel like you might have been exposed or are showing some symptoms, because the healthcare workers, we want to try to keep in the front line as much as we can. And so, Chancellor, that's kind of the story of testing. As you know, I'm one of 4 doctors that is on the governor's new strike force to reopen Texas. And what I'll say, without going through a lot of details, anything that comes out of that strike force as a recommendation to open up Texas has to be filtered through the 4 doctors that he's tasked with doing this. And that includes Commissioner John Hellerstedt, Dr. Mark McClellan, Dr. Parker Hudson, and myself, where 2 or 3, sometimes 4 times a week, we go through in a very deliberate way, pretty rigorous way, all the things that we might consider that would need to be in place if we're going to open another business or type of business or the economy. It's hard work. It needs to be hard work. It needs to be thoughtful. And I'm pleased at least where we are today in terms of what the kind of the runway looks for opening up Texas.
Thanks, John. That's great information. And I'm sure we'll be back during this call to you and to David with some specific questions, because most of what I've seen that people are interested in are issues related to HR questions and the job questions and work questions, and issues related to the health questions that are both broadly speaking in terms of the threat to health of people and their families, but also with the quote reopening, how we will manage that to ensure people's safety. So we'll come back to that. I want to shift to the academic institutions briefly. They have an entirely different set of issues for the most part than our health institutions. We read in the papers and see in the news every day, I think, stories about this, the change in the environment where millions of Americans were going to college and living on campuses. Now the numbers are very, very low about people who are still on campuses, largely only those who had no other viable alternative to return to after the spring break period. This pivot to online has been one of the most remarkable things, I think, in my 3 decades. I'm not that old. I'm in my 4th decade in higher education, but it's been one of the most remarkable things I've seen. I mean, this is, I believe that this is one of the disruptive moments that we will see in higher education, which has been predicted for a long time. It's been resisted successfully by institutions that tend to be pretty conservative, and not for bad reasons. You know, we've had a pretty good business model and it has worked well. And but I think that in some ways the silver lining here is that we had to figure out anyway how to educate at least twice as many Texans. We aren't providing enough education now. Our numbers of students who enter and graduate from college are not high nationally. They're below the national average. So we're not knocking it out in the park now in terms of how well we're doing today, but population doubles over 30 years. We got to change the way we're doing business if we're going to effectively prepare these students for the workforce. So if there can be a silver lining, and I believe out of crisis and challenge often comes great innovation and opportunity. And this one may be that this future of education and future of work that we're struggling with is really kind of smacking us right in the face right now. It's not something we're going to think about for years in terms of planning. And the fact that we took millions of students in a week or two's time and tens of thousands of faculty members across the country and switched to online, which is not perfect by any means. Just don't get me wrong. This, switching to a Zoom meeting for a class by someone who's had no training in it and may not be able to have the full kind of engagement that you would have physically. It's not perfect. There are great platforms for online education, and some of our campuses are far down the roads with some of their programs, but most students didn't have experience with fully online courses, and most faculty didn't teach fully online courses. This is all of a sudden forcing something, a kind of transformation, and we'll see how much of that is permanent. My prediction is that there will be much of it that continues, that faculty in some cases will be interested in finding new modalities of teaching, and students will be interested. Now, the immediate impacts are more of a challenge. And you know that we've had very difficult situations in our health institutions, as we've referred to, because of the loss in revenue from procedures and from seeing patients. At our academic institutions, the first thing we did was refund the residence halls, the meal plans, and the parking, the main auxiliary expenses for students. And so, for instance, at UT Austin alone, that was $26 million out in a payment to students to refund those auxiliaries they wouldn't be using. And we'll see more of that this summer. because we're going to be online in the summer. There may be some minor exceptions later, but at the beginning, we're going to be online, and we're probably going to be online the entire time for all students. So those auxiliary enterprises that exist on a campus, a fitness center, athletic facilities, dining, that kind of thing, will again go unused. And there are employees that work that are supported by those auxiliary revenues, and that's their job. And so this will continue to be a challenge. Another challenge will be enrollments. Now, it may not affect us as much in the summer, and we're seeing some encouraging signs that our institutions may even grow enrollment in summer year over year. I don't know that I'm quite as optimistic about fall, and this is even before we get to talking about fall opening for our campuses, but I think we're going to see a significant impact of international students. The largest cohort of international students across the country, and certainly in Texas, are Chinese students. And I suspect we will see a downturn in the number of Chinese students that come to the country. And we certainly will if we're still experiencing managing through COVID pandemic. But there'll be travel restrictions and other kinds of things that may affect that. So I think international enrollments will be challenged. We'll have to work hard at that. Some people predict that we'll see less state-to-state migration of students, that it will be a natural impulse for parents and students to think about staying closer to home, particularly incoming freshmen. And so while that may not be a big impact on Texas in terms of exporting and importing of students, we've got a lot of students here that we could educate. But a place like New Jersey, which exports more students than any place in the country, it'll be interesting to see what happens there if those students stay closer to home and how they'll manage that capacity. I suspect there'll be a shift in enrollments overall to those places that have mature, high quality online programs. That if students are going to make choices about how much they pay and what they're going to get, sophisticated students are going to look at those places that are best at offering those kinds of programs. And so we may see some shift that we wouldn't have seen in other times. Philanthropic support, which we've done so well across the university system, and I'm heartened to hear that today we have not seen much of a drop-off on that, but what's happening in the capital markets could mean that all this uncertainty may affect the folks who have so generously supported us in the past. And then I'd say the kind of final thing about this is, Texas is facing a bit of a double whammy right now. And obviously this isn't just related to the academic institutions, but in addition to the COVID pandemic, which has enormous fiscal consequences for the entire state, which will affect us. The oil economy has just been incredibly impacted, not only by the demand loss because of COVID, but more importantly, because of the movements in the market by the Saudis and the Russians that have really dried up demand for Texas oil. And the prices have gone to unprecedented low levels. And so what was always one of our secret weapons, one of the great assets we had, 2.1 million acres in the Permian, which produced a huge amount of revenue for the University of Texas system and Texas A&M, will be impacted in the future. Too early to tell right now what that'll be over the long term, but in the immediate term, the revenue from our lands, the direct revenue coming to UTIMCO to invest, will, I'm certain, be cut in more than in half from last year to next year. So these are all things that are going to impact us. But again, I don't think the picture is entirely negative. I think there are some great opportunities for the university system to come out of this if we recognize them and take advantage of them. So I mentioned that online during the summer, there are a number of other academic adjustments that are taking place, which I'll just mention briefly. The board met last month and provided a degree of delegation to deal primarily with academic matters. We've moved to pass-fail at our academic campuses for the most part. We're changing admissions processes because they're canceled the SAT and ACT this spring. So we've got to find other ways to adapt to that. Issues like the tenure clock and the huge disruption, not only in the faculty that are assistant professors working towards that tenure decision, but also all the faculty who are involved in reviewing their work and helping make decisions on it. So we're, at Steve Leslie's advice, working with the provosts and the presidents, we're adjusting each of those areas so that we can continue to move ahead as an institution and then keep our faculty on track, keep our students on track. So you may have seen there have already been a good deal of discussion about what will happen in the state when we move into this next session of the legislature, where they'll be working on budgets. There was an announcement the other day from the speaker proposing or floating a 5% reduction among all agencies. There was apparently an incorrect rumor floated in the last 24 hours that the governor was looking at 20%, but I think that that was quickly dismissed, and I think everybody believes that there will be a significant budget impact on the state of Texas this year. How that's managed between the state's reserves, its rainy day funds, how higher education is treated compared to other agencies. I mean, it is my view and my conviction that when people look at how our health institutions were so critical to this working through this pandemic, and the fact that we need more doctors in the state of Texas, that we need more healthcare professionals, and if you look at how the state's going to recover in the future with the new kinds of work and opportunities and need for education, it's my hope that people will recognize how fundamentally important public higher education and the UT system are to getting the state in the kind of recovery position it needs to be in. So across the system, we saw last week, I think it was, John, that UTMB announced a series of steps on managing their budget. They did a furlough for all employees for an 8-week period, 1 day each week, which means that those employees will retain their benefits, but they were in a very difficult budget position. Has to do with a variety of things that institution faces, and not just COVID-19. But so they did that, and they announced a hiring freeze and a number of other things to try to manage that. Most of our academic institutions have already announced or will announce hiring freezes, which essentially means that only those employees that must be hired because they are student facing in an area where we need them for enrollment, or they're involved in some way in the research enterprise where it involves important work that's going on that can't be ceased. What it really means is that the decision level will be at a higher point for any hiring. So they're freezing hiring. They're eliminating the next round of across the board salary increases. They're restricting travel, which may not seem like much of an impact right now. And purchases and projects are being put on hold. And this is all in an attempt to try to get ready for reductions in state funding, which most people think will be coming. Now, we've gotten some assistance from the federal government. It passed the CARES Act, $2.2 billion piece of legislation, which provided $14 billion to higher education in the country, $173 million to the UT system. It based on the number of Pell Grant students and the number of non-online students. And our institutions have all applied for that funding for the first tranche of it. The money we're getting, about half of it is available, 86 million right away for direct payments to students, cannot be used by the institution. So our institutions, all 14, got some amount of money, RGV being the highest because of the predominance of Pell students. And one of our health science centers, I think Tyler, the lowest on that. But they've all applied for it, they'll all get it. We'll go to the Board of Regents to approve their plans, but it will mainly involve just getting checks out to students who were affected by the COVID pandemic. The second half of that, about another $6.5 billion, of which we will get 86 million, will be for institutional support, for budget reductions that they have had because of COVID and challenges. And so that will help. But if you think back to my example of UT Austin, where they spent $26 million on refunds, they will get 16 million out of the CARES Act for the institution. So that means just on that one budget impact alone, they're $10 million short. And that will not by any means be the extent of the budget impacts. So what happens in the fall? This is the big question that everybody is thinking about. The strike force that John is a member of is thinking about that. And I think from what he said already, you get the idea that nothing is going to happen, including the opening of the University of Texas system, institutions and offices, without considering the health and the safety of the people who work there and the people they interact with. And I participate in these conversations with presidents around the country every day, and everybody's thinking about the same things. How soon can we open? Will it be online to start? Will it be a delayed physical start? When we come, will everybody be wearing a mask? Will they be spread out in classes? Will we have large lecture halls? Will we do those kinds of offerings online and smaller groups that can be distanced in a classroom? How will we manage residence halls? These are all extraordinarily important questions. You can see from the news that a couple of institutions have already said they're coming back. I think it may be a little premature to say that because of what we're learning now, as Dr. Lakey referred to earlier, and some of these models and how they can be unpredictable depending on what the assumptions are that are made. UT Austin announced a day or so ago that their goal is to come back early in the fall. And that's true. That's everybody's goal. Everybody would love to be able to do that, but we got to plan for a variety of different scenarios. And I mentioned several of them, but we'll continue to plan for that. These decisions about whether we actually reopen will be coming, in another month or two. We hope that we'll have enough information and that we can make those decisions. Similarly, and maybe just a tiny bit closer to home, returning to the UT system facilities here in Irving, in Houston, in Midland. So this is an important question too. And this strike force that Dr. Zerwas is on, chaired by James Huffines, former chairman of the Board of Regents. There are a number of other former regents on the strike force as well. So we're fortunate we've got people who really know our places, who are involved there. But we have the same kinds of decisions to make. how soon can people come back to work in the building? Right now, we have a very small number of university system people, maybe 20 a day, that are in the building, that are security, that are IT, and others that are essential, that need to be there for one purpose or another. The Army, by the way, has more people there because they've got classified work they're doing, and they are able to work in shifts to manage to continue that. But I want to say the first consideration for us is your health and safety. The first consideration for us is that we can't open and come back to whatever normal will be going forward without being able to ensure ourselves that the practices in place make sure that you are safe and that we aren't putting a burden on the healthcare system. We want you to continue to be healthy, safe, be able to take care of your families and do your work. And so we will look at any kind of re-entry and reopening. I'm positive it will be gradual. And we'll start by looking at those folks probably who have more difficulty doing their work outside of the office and need to get there. But we're going to make it safe for them by not having too many people immediately. So we've got a task force that's Phil Dendy has put together that is looking at the whole range of questions about how we do the sort of repopulating of the building. And so, Phil, do you want to say a word about what's going on with that?
Sure. Thank you, Chancellor. I appreciate that, and thank you all for everybody's hard work throughout the course of this entire event. Just a little background. We have actually been working on these issues all the way back to early February. We've had a system-wide group dealing with make sure we're maintaining support for the institutions. But we've also had a system administration group that's included a multi-departmental representation working on all of these issues. One of the terms that I heard the other day was, when are we going to return to work? And well, we've been working all along, clearly. We've just been doing it differently. So the issues that we need to address are very expansive. And so we've got a broad group of people, multi-departments that have been working on these issues, both on the continuity issues, but now kind of shifting towards coming back. So it's a multi-departmental group, but there's a core strike force, if you will, that will be developing the final formal recommendations about how we actually implement this. And that includes Dr. David Lakey, Julie Goon-Warden, Tamara English from the Office of General Counsel, and Stephen Harris with facilities, who are going to be pulling together the final recommendations about how we do that. As the Chancellor mentioned, we're clearly going to be following the guidance of the local, county, the city, county, and state jurisdictions about how we actually and when we actually do it. But there's a variety of issues that have already started to be developing about access, about screening, about the human resource issues that you've discussed already, meeting sizes, social distancing, how all that is ultimately going to be phased in over time. Because we're, as you mentioned, Chancellor, we won't be just flipping a switch and coming back to work. It won't work that way at all. We want to make sure that everything is strategic, it's phased, and most of all, that it's safe. And we'll be working with those folks at University Lands and with Shared Information Systems to make sure that it works well in those areas as well. So we can provide that level of support in all areas of system, not just in the downtown UT system building. So happy to.
Thank you, Phil. So another question that's come in is that system employees have been productive during this time working from home. Is this a possible way for some going forward? Well, I would say that if my own experience is any example, I'm now a believer in working remotely, on how hard you work. In fact, I can't wait to get back in the office. You know, we put in place a new remote working policy without regard to this at all that Julie Gunawardene and her team put together before this all started. And we'll be taking a look at that in the future. My guess is that a lot of businesses, and Dr. Kelly and I have talked about this, a lot of businesses are going to be looking at their real estate footprint and how much they need to have in terms of downtown office space versus, you know, having more employees work remotely with this experience. I think this is one of those opportunities like teaching and learning remotely, which will rapidly escalate our thinking on this. Now, the downside of that is that there may not be many people who are out there looking to rent our space if they're all thinking about how they work remotely. But to the answer to the question is, I think absolutely there will be a new kind of consideration given to how we all are able to work and contribute, whether in the office or outside of the office. Here's another question about the reopening. How will the UT system handle people with compromised immune systems and make sure we have the safeguards, testing, and potential vaccines in place? So I don't know if John or David, either or both of you want to take this on.
Well, I'm happy to jump in on that, Chancellor, and David can speak to it also. That's clearly a group of individuals that I would consider high risk. They are high risk, regardless of their age, as a matter of fact. We do know that, you know, some of the greatest at-risk people are over 70, and if you're over 60, plus you have some other kind of illness or something that goes along with it, you're at greater risk. But in general, if people have some immunocompromised status, whether it just be the way God made them or whether it's because of some medication that they're on, that they are at increased risk. And as we start to think about, you know, when people come back into the workplace, how they come back into the workplace, we need to be conscientious about that. All the things that we do to socially distance, as well as to wear masks, good personal hygiene, all those things benefit the immunocompromised person just as much as it benefits the person who is otherwise unexposed. And, you know, until we get what is considered an effective therapeutic, and perhaps a therapeutic that you can take easier than an infusion through an IV, and until we get a vaccine, you know, we're going to be in a pretty difficult spot for the next several weeks and months. And so, you know, I think that's just, you know, something that people need to be hyper aware of, that if you're somebody with some kind of immunocompromised status, and, you know, not to share personal, you know, health information by any means, but it's helpful for those of us who are in an environment where somebody does happen to work in that setting, that we know about that. But that's something to think about for the people that may need a little bit longer before they come back to work, is for some of these things to kind of play out before the person who's immunocompromised but can still work from home.
Great, thanks, John. David, you want to add anything?
I don't have much to add. Obviously, that is a concern, and Julie and Philip and I will make sure that we address that in the plans that we've put in place. But I think it's a little premature for me to say exactly what that plan would be right now. But obviously, I hear you, and we'll make sure that we take that into consideration. Thank you, Chancellor.
Thanks. Okay, so here's a question that I know I'd be asking if my children were a bit younger. With the order closing Texas schools for the remainder of the year, will we have a formal plan for remote work for parents with school-aged children? Employees with young children are being asked by the school districts to homeschool their children, and daycare is closed. While supervisors can be flexible about office hours, staff are getting worn out and distressed, trying to spend all day and working 3 or more days homeschooling and tending to other things. So let me just say, this is a good point to have your youngest child be 22 years old. But I'm going to turn this over to Julie Gunnawarden to address it.
Thank you, Chancellor. And I know that many of my colleagues are under tremendous stress over this issue, and no one's more sympathetic than I am. I think most of you know my husband and I have 3 children, so we know what it's like to be working parents. I am struck by the fact that at UT System, we are enormously fortunate because we have a number of leave categories available to us, and we've had a supplement from the federal government. So I remind folks that you have, most of us have earned comp time, and most of us have vacation balances that we can use to provide relief and reduce the stress. It's also been supplemented by some new federal legislation, which in its simplest is the following. If your daycare or school has been closed, you are able to take up to 10 weeks of leave that will be compensated at 2/3 of your daily pay with a cap of $200. I think it's important for people to remember that that leave can be used intermittently. So we've sent this information out across system. It's also, there's a series of FAQs that deal with this on the COVID website. And if anybody has any other additional questions around it, I'd be happy to take them offline. Thank you, Chancellor.
Sorry. Here's another one for you along the same lines. What flexibility do supervisors have to grant administrative leave for outstanding performance to employees to address the challenges in the previous question? Can employees use sick leave and or wellness, vacation comp for this purpose? You may have answered some of that. If the employee's only options to use vacation or comp are to take 10 weeks granted by the federal government, then I think we should say that and explain that leave is governed by state statute and we do not have flexibility.
Okay. So this is another good question, and it is very easy when we're all under stress to sort of conflate issues. So let me try to take these one by one. In terms of being able to use sick or wellness leave for childcare, that is not an allowable use of that type of leave. And as always, UT System will follow state and federal statute. In terms of the category around outstanding leave, that leave should be used for the purpose that it was intended, which is really to reward employees who have done something that is above and beyond the call of duty and demonstrates outstanding performance. It is also not intended to provide a stopgap for child or care because of the closures of daycare or schools. And again, I think we're very, very fortunate at UT System to have all of the leave categories that we do that many of our fellow Americans don't share. So with that, Chancellor, I'll back to you.
Okay, thanks, Julie. Scott, I got one for you. Does the decreased lands revenue also mean a decreased AUF budget? And will that impact UT System staffing strategy for the years 2021?
So as the Chancellor described, oil prices obviously are plummeting. We will receive significantly less revenue from the university lands into the AUF. However, the way this works, and I again applaud those who set this up a century or more ago, it goes into an endowment. And so that endowment then is distributed at about 4 or 5%. And therefore, there's a great smoothing effect. You know, when the revenue went up significantly, over time, we saw a building of capacity, both in AUF and capital projects, but not immediately. Similarly, with the severe reduction that we're expecting, it really does not have an overly significant effect on this year's AUF or next year's AUF. Now, having said that, you know, we all have tough decisions we're going to have to work through. And we're going to look at the same thing, travel. We're going to look at trying to hold contracts and delaying them. You know, we're going to do what we can to reflect overall reductions in the state, and over time, it will potentially reduce our capital capacity. But in the immediate level, it does not. In fact, the oil price impact will likely be felt first in what happens with the state appropriations. Because while we're a diversified economy, more so than we've been, that reduction in overall state revenue will come back to us, I think, in reductions first, in reductions to state appropriations, and we will see it in a diminishment of the AUF.
Thanks, Scott. There was, it's sort of a related question, but I'll answer this. It was about, are we going to be able to rewatch or follow up in writing on this? I was not able to get the entire list of financial decisions that have been made in anticipation of cuts. So that's a good point. And, you know, I think maybe we'll do this on a website or something, kind of try to collect some of the activities that are taking place across the system so that people will be aware of it. And as Scott said, we'll be considering some of these same things. Now, in the interview I had yesterday, they asked me about would these decisions be made system-wide on budget reductions or made by institutions. And my answer is that there are certain things that we're all going to have to do that are kind of the low-hanging fruit of trying to prepare ourselves for a difficult state budget. And those will be done across the board. It would be almost irresponsible not to do them. But beyond that, the institutions and the system administration are all kind of in different places. You know, if you have a medical school and clinical operations, you have a different kind of business impact than if you don't. If you are heavily residential, you know, we see this just in the impact of the refunds that were made and then the CARES Act money that came in. Those places that gave refunds for their residence halls, you know, UT Austin, as I said, gave out $26 million overall for that, parking and meals. Some of the other campuses have very small numbers of students in dorms, refunded small numbers and are getting, it's not a windfall, it won't even come close to their overall expenses, but much more of the federal money that is going to go to help them manage other things. So there may have to be a difference as how those budgets are managed at the campus level. If you have major athletics programs and you have none of the revenue coming in from events and other auxiliary things, you know, that's going to be another issue. So we'll make sure that people are aware of this, and we'll keep this team and all the and people throughout the building aware of kind of what's going on around the country, or not around the country, around the system. Scott, somebody wants to, is a question about UTIMCO and the lands revenue, and does this mean that there'll be an impact on pensions in the future?
Again, you know, the pension question is an interesting one. Obviously, capital markets are down, oil markets are down. The beauty for UTIMCO and for really all of us is we manage for the long term. We saw this in 2008, and then we saw quick rebounds. Who knows what will happen a year or a year and a half or 2 years from now, but regression to the mean in capital markets is a very powerful phenomenon. It may not happen right away, but over time it tends to occur. And so, you know, those who have their own personal investments, again, you know, my own personal advice for what it's worth, but I mean, it's about trying to maintain and continue a steady course. And overall, we'll see some bumps, but there's a great smoothing effect, both in the UTIMCO distributions, certainly in the university lands distributions, and candidly over time, even in kind of pension and retirement distributions.
Okay, I want to footnote that with a note I just saw from Mark Hauser, who leads the university lands office for the UT system, that every indication is that oil and gas play a huge part in the world long-term economy or long-term energy demands. And I think that's right. And so over the long term, we'll probably be okay. And if you've lived in Texas for long enough, you've seen some pretty significant ups and downs in the oil market, the energy prices. So, you know, we may see a sorting out in the economy, but there's no question it will be back in some form. There are a couple other health questions, and we're running just a little bit over, but I'm going to just I want to make sure we hit the questions that are asked now. Let me get to this. Hang on, bear with me for just a second. It's a very small. Okay, here's one for one of our physicians. A few days ago, the news mentioned that the severity of infected individual case might depend on the dosage they're exposed to. Do you have any follow-up on this? Can a person get a dosage from a breath or a sneeze from one person and a few hours or minutes or whatever later get another dose from the same or a different person and therefore experience a rougher outcome?
So let me jump into this one and then a couple other questions I saw, Chancellor, if I may. I don't know. It doesn't make pure biological sense to me. You know, if you've been exposed, viruses replicate very quickly. You know, you may have a higher chance of being really infected because your body could, through a variety of mechanisms, we call innate immunity, be able to protect you from one, and then another dose of the virus, so to speak, could actually set it off. But whether it makes it more severe or not, that doesn't quite make sense with me, but I'm happy to look into it. Chancellor, there was another question that I saw related to the new information that just came out within the last 24 hours related to what we're calling a hypercoagulable state with young individuals that have had stroke or other problems, really had very minimal symptoms with COVID-19, but the concern in it is that they were afraid of going to the emergency room because of COVID-19 and didn't get the treatment that they needed early enough for their stroke. And so this is something, again, it came out in the New England Journal of Medicine within the last 24 hours, something we need to follow and get more detail. But I think one of those messages in that article is if you really have a serious medical condition like a stroke, chest pain, etc., you need to seek medical care and get those type of issues resolved early versus being afraid of the emergency room and not getting that treatment. And then, Chancellor, I saw some questions related to this fall and herd immunity. And I guess my quick answer to it is we still have a lot to figure out related to this virus. I think many of us think that a lot of people had minimal to no symptoms, but still had infection. And we'll need the summer to try to figure out really how many people actually got infected and if there is a herd immunity. And we need to figure out if previous infection really confers a protective immunity for individuals. And so a lot of research that needs to take place before we can fully answer a couple of those questions.
Okay. So another one, a little more specific on that same vein.
Yes,
John, I don't know if you want to take this one. What, if any, screening procedures might be implemented for employees, tenants, or guests once the UT system building begins reopening?
Well, let me share with you the situation that I'm in right now, frankly, and what a lot of the conversation has been as we explore different businesses or sectors of the economy to open up. There's a very consistent theme about screening people for symptoms that might be suggestive of COVID, especially in the midst of the pandemic and for which we'll be in for the next several weeks and to some degree months. But you know, I get screened by DPS every day that I drive into this parking lot, you know, asking me if I've been around anybody with known COVID. Do I have fever? Do I have a dry cough? Do I have any gastrointestinal symptoms? Every day ask these same questions. And, you know, if you have any of those things, then you're rejected. And you have your temperature taken. I have it not just once, but I have it twice. So once to get in the parking lot and once to get into this this basement that I spend most of my time in. And I think that's just going to be a fairly common thing that is going to be done out there and stuff. So that's just, you know, I think that the precursor to a lot of people being allowed to come back into the business environment. And there'll also need to be, you know, a fairly robust ability to test and determine whether people are COVID positive or not. And then there's the whole test for antibodies that Dr. Lakey is more well versed on that than myself. But, you know, that's another testing opportunity out there that we have to determine really what does that play when we determine people's susceptibility to the disease and so forth. I haven't quite figured that out myself. I think that's still a dialogue that's occurring out there.
Okay, thank you. So amazingly enough, I think we've run out of questions right now. So we're going to wrap this up. We'll continue to communicate with all of you. Try to keep this pattern of early in the week and end of the week. I know when you're not in the building and not bumping into people in the hallways, the information flow dries up a little bit. So it's more important than ever, I think, that we keep communicating, that you keep checking the website, that you submit questions if you have them. We don't have to do this just at these town halls, but you can submit questions and we will have either the medical or health experts, the financial, the HR experts respond to those on the website so that you can have them answered as they come up. One of the things we want to try to do with this communication is to reduce the kinds of anxieties that are quite natural for all of us at this time as we're trying to cope with you know, personal and family challenges, keeping everybody healthy and safe, plus work in a completely different mode. So we want to try to reduce that anxiety by communicating frequently, by being able to answer your questions. You know, I'm not gonna kid you. This is going to be a tough time. Tough time with tough budgets. The state is going to face a significant fiscal impact, in part because of COVID, and as Dr. Kelly said, in part because of you know, the energy economy, which affects Texas more than any place in the country. So this is going to be a difficult time, and it's going to be difficult for all of us, but we want to be communicate openly with you about what kinds of things we're thinking about and what kinds of things our institutions are already doing, some of them who are feeling this more acutely than others right now. So we'll keep that communication level up. You know, this has been, I think, a pretty remarkable time. And, you know, hopefully we will look back on this in the not too distant future and be able to think about, and I think take some satisfaction in how this was managed at this time by all of you and by your colleagues and people across the state and the country. It has been really a kind of a remarkable shift in the way we do business. And for the most part, I think that we have continued across the university system to do what we need to do, which is to treat patients in Texas, which is to prepare for this pandemic and then manage our way through it. And at our academic institutions, to keep our students on track so that those who are going to graduate this spring are still going to graduate this spring. They may not get together physically and celebrate until the fall, but we'll have virtual commencements across our institutions. And I hope that you all take satisfaction in knowing that as a part of this enterprise that helps keep these institutions going, supports these faculty and these students, these staff across the system, you know, we're not missing a beat in keeping these students on track and on serving the state of Texas. And for that, I thank you. It's been a terrific and I know challenging effort. And I thank you for being an important part of it. And I hope that you stay safe, stay healthy, keep your family safe. We'll be back in touch with you to talk about how we do our work together and how we get back into a little bit more normal workplace situation where we are able to come in and out of the office and spend time together. I look forward to seeing all of you again, and not just on this computer screen. So thanks to my colleagues for participating today. Thanks for all you're doing, John and David, for the state of Texas and health and helping reopen the state. Phil, for leading this effort relating to what kinds of things we think about, and Julie for the work that you're doing on a number of HR issues that you probably thought you wouldn't ever have to deal with. Steve, for leading after having been through at least one very difficult financial downturn in the past, for helping lead these academic institutions and new presidents and provosts through the tough decisions that they're making. Scott, for a steady hand with our fiscal situation and thoughtfully managing how we're going to move forward. And Dan, staying wherever you are at that harbor, at your boat, working there. But appreciate what you're doing with regard to a lot of the new challenges that are coming out of this environment. And thanks to all of you that are on the call. Appreciate what you're doing every day. Keep this place going. I'm very, very proud to be able to say that I have colleagues that I do at the University of Texas System Administration that are doing a terrific job during this time. So thanks very much. Hope you have a great rest of the week and a great weekend, and we'll be in touch soon. Bye, everybody.